Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Daniel Gormali. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Hometown Chess Hero. We're going to do another review today, this time about a chess book, a very interesting chess book. And it's by Elk and Ruby and it's called Obsession, a chess biography of Vsevolod Rauzer. I'm not sure about the pronunciation, as you can tell. I've probably done the worst pronunciation ever of his name. I do apologise to Mr. Rauzer if he's watching this. We won't be watching this because unfortunately he's no longer with us. In fact, he died many years ago. Unsurprisingly, because this book is about a player from the early period of Soviet chess history. Rauzer was a player who was a contemporary of Botvinnik. I think he was maybe possibly a little bit older than Botvinnik. When was Rauzer, not Rausis, of course. Rausis was a Latvian GM who sadly died a few years ago and was involved in a cheating controversy. Obviously, Rauzer was around before that and before the times of engines and so on. It was a lot more interesting era. He was born in 1908. I think Botvinnik was born something like 1911, maybe 1912, 1913, not sure. So he's a slightly older than Botvinnik, but yeah, around about the same era that he came in prominence. He played many games against Botvinnik, actually. So what's this book about? It's basically about Rauzer. It mentions some of his life and some of his exploits in the early part of the book. And in the second part of the book, you've got a collection of his games. There's quite a lot of his games there. There's also some nice photographs. The author of the book is the son, I believe, of, again, somebody that was associated with Rauzer, who was, again, I'm probably going to annoy people with the pronunciation, Konstantinopolsky. There was a Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. So let's just think about Constantinople. But Constantinople was a great Soviet chess player, and he was also a trainer. So if you see some of the photographs, there's one where he plays against Taimanov. If I just hold that up to the camera. Sorry, just hold that up to the camera. And then there's one, if we come down a little bit, there's also one where he's playing against Efim Geller, young Efim Geller. So he was a little bit older than some of these characters, but he was in many ways influenced by Rauzer. So what makes this book interesting for me is when they talk about his obsession. So that was really why I wanted to get the book, because it talks about how he was obsessed with chess to such a degree he would do many hours on chess a day. I think he was born in the wrong era. I think if he was born today with the supercomputers and so on, he would have become super grandmaster. Certainly he gave a lot of contribution to chess theory, Rauzer. Of course, there's a famous Rauzer variation in the Sicilian where you go, which I've played many times with black. I think it's something like e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, cd, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, bishop g5. Something like that is called the Rauzer variation. So he made a lot of contributions to opening theory. He was obsessed with opening theory, and he tried to make e4 look like a forced win. However, because of this obsession, because of this drive, he ended up suffering a mental breakdown. And he spent time in a mental asylum. Sadly, he died young. He died like in the siege of Leningrad, which would have been, I'm kind of giving away the whole book really, but you read about a lot more detail in the book. Which the siege of Leningrad would have been 1941. Of course, another famous chess player was involved with that in terms of he grew up in that era, which was Korchnoi. So that was the end of Rauzer's life, and Korchnoi was the beginning of his life. Another famous chess player. So Rauzer, fascinating period of Soviet history. It's a little bit similar to that book, I would say. Is it called Memories, Dreams and Reflections about the early days of the Soviet Championship, this book. It reminds me a little bit of that, which is obviously a great credit to the book. Yeah, there's not a lot I can say about the book, really. It's just a very good book, and There's I like the little studies at the start. It took me a while to get past the studies at the start. Um, the first aspect of Rauzer's talent that got wide recognition was his endgame analysis. He was just devoted to chess. You know, that's what you love. You know, people are just devoted to chess. I spend too much time watching Netflix. If I spent the amount of hours that Raoul spent on chess, I'd probably be a much better player. You know, I'm a decent player, but I could be a much better player. Anyway, yeah, so when we talk about mental health in chess, you know, obviously recently we've heard about Navarra, you know, talked about his struggles in relation. He was accused, but not accused, but he was embroiled in some kind of cheating controversy that Kramnik was trying to allude to. Kramnik himself, I believe, is suffering some kind of midlife crisis. Kramnik is one of these people that when he was playing chess full time, he would work incredibly hard. I mean, I'm sure that all of these players at some point spent many hours, you know, really, really been obsessed with chess, like Rauzer did. And, you know, maybe they didn't, even like the top players, maybe they didn't maintain it for as long as he did. Like, maybe that's what pushed him over the edge, that he was just doing it religiously, like just non-stop. But a lot of them are workhorses, they have to be, so they're super talented and they're workhorses as well. Now, quite a few players have actually suffered full mental breakdowns. Another chess player who suffered a full mental breakdown was, I believe, Paul Morphy. Had some kind of mental breakdown. He was one of the most famous players from the 19th century, probably the most famous player from the 19th century. And, you know, he would have been world champion if the world champion title would have been around in that period. He suffered a mental breakdown. He died young as well. I believe he died possibly in his 30s. I think he died in a bathtub or something like that, drowned in a bathtub. Bobby Fischer, of course, gained the world championship title in 1972. He relinquished it in 1975 because FIDE wouldn't give in to his demands for the world championship, which also involved the winner would have to get to 10 wins, and it'd have to be 2 points clear. So they'd have to win by at least 10-8. 10-9 wouldn't be enough. You'd then continue the match. Anatoly Karpov was the grateful recipient of that withdrawal by Fischer in 1975, and Karpov himself was only 23 at the time. So a little bit like with Rauzer, you often have this obsession when you're younger, and I think that's what happened with Morphy and Fischer and a lot of these people, possibly like Kramnik, people like that, got a little bit doolally because they spent too long studying chess. And I've often felt that, like when I've had really obsessive moments, I've like if I keep going, at some point you think, why am I doing this? And I think that's where the mental obsession comes from, where the mental breakdown comes from. You have this kind of moment where you confront yourself, which is dangerous, because you're like, why am I doing this? You know, and if the whole point of what you're doing and you put so much into it suddenly is revealed to you as useless, that in itself can create some kind of issue. So, you know, possibly that's what happened to Rauzer. He wasn't able to maintain that obsession, and that obsession drove him. You know, the desire to maintain that obsession drove him into this kind of like crazy state, a very sad, tragic kind of figure. I think if he was around today, he would definitely be considered to be on the autistic spectrum, because I think also that obsession as well tends to often derive from being slightly autistic, and just having that complete focus on one activity. That tends to be what specifies autistic people. As one of the things that specifies autistic people from normal people is that real, like, you know, ability to just completely focus in on one thing. Actually, when you look at the picture of him on the front cover, he looks a little bit like Tiger Woods, funny enough. So he's got a little bit of an Asian kind of background, possibly. And obviously, Tiger Woods, his real name is Eldrick Woods, is like half Asian. His mother was Thai. So he died like quite recently. His dad was American, African American. Eldrick Woods. Sorry, his no, who was it? That's Tiger's real name. Who was Earl Woods? Earl Woods was Tiger's And again, that was obsessional as well, because what Tiger would do from a young age, he was obsessed with golf, and it was partly from his father. So his father would put him up in the high chair, and then Earl would hit shots into the simulator, and that kind of he absorbed that very early, and that's why he became probably the best junior player ever in golf, and then went on to become arguably the best player in adult golf as well. Certainly one of the best. So yeah, I think overall a very good book, I would say. I'm not sure what I would rate this, to be honest. I'm not going to give it a rating. I just think, it's a nice book. It's a nice book, and it's a tragic story. It makes you sad to think about what happened to some of these people during that period. Obviously, that whole period was messed up, but I think that's something that, we miss as, everyone's bringing this in, this AI and stuff, and obviously there's stuff going on in Ukraine, don't get me wrong, it's not all, but I think, almost as a human being, you miss that kind of conflict, you miss that kind of, if everything's too safe, too simple, something goes missing from your personality. Now let's read some of the reviews of this book by people on Amazon. So let's just read it. As I say, I'm not going to try and pronounce his first name. Vsevolod Rauzer. If I just missed it, Vsevolod Rauzer, born in Kiev in 1908. Of course, Kiev, part of the Soviet Union, is now part of Ukraine. Kiev is also, that's where the famous Russian princes were from, who started Russia, like Holy Russ, I believe. They were from Kiev, possibly. Was one of the world's leading chess opening theoreticians and thinkers in the 1930s. As a player, he was an uncompromising attacker, trying to avoid draws as well as to prove that E4, 1E4 wins by force. According to Mikhail Botvinnik, his opening research with link middle games plans gives us every reason to place V. Rauzer, because he obviously had problems pronouncing his name as well, among the founders of the Soviet chess school. By the way, there isn't a real Soviet chess school, it's just a term. We discussed this on another video. So yeah, what Botvinnik says there with linked middle game players, that would have been very important to Botvinnik, because he was somebody who pioneered this idea that you didn't just need to memorize the opening, you need to know the plans that came from the opening. When I looked through the Rauzer book, actually, he wasn't a one-trick pony, he wasn't a one-dimensional attacking player. He could play positions very well, and he had very interesting views about different openings as well. For example, his views on the Reti were very revealing to me when I read the book. Okay, so let's go down and read the reviews. Is that it? No, there's no. Okay, so let's carry on reading the. Okay, he made big contributions to theory. Something's gone wrong with this mouse. Oh my god. Right, okay. I just put a battery in it the other day. A new battery. I just put a new battery in you the other day. What's wrong with you? See, this sort of thing a mad person would say. Just start talking to a mouse. Start talking to a mouse. But like I say, you can joke about it, but it is a serious issue, mental health, especially when you're a competitor. That's the other thing that can put you under pressure, that you're expected to get good results. And obviously in the Soviet Union, there was that external pressure, which was discussed a lot in these kind of Sazonko books, that there was external pressure to perform. You often wouldn't get invitations to foreign tournaments and so on. I find these Soviet books fascinating, because for me, Russian history is possibly, and I think, any kind of history around about that, Soviet Union history, even going further back to Romanovs and obviously Peter the Great, all that is some of the most fascinating part of history for me, full stop. I've always been fascinated by Russia, just the sheer expanse of it, the idea that you could go into this country and you just get lost in the sheer size of it. And obviously, yeah, it's got that kind of romantic kind of Dr. Zhivago feel about the country. So he made big contributions to theory in the Sicilian, French and Caro-Kann defences, among others. The book's introductory articles contain deep dive into Rauzer's opening laboratory and shed light on the historical development of key variations. The present work contains 96 games, nearly all of them played by Rauzer, Opponents include Botvinnik, Fine, Ruben Fine, Levenfish, I think it was Grigori Levenfish, Lilienthal, was that Hungarian? It might have been Andor's Lilienthal. Romanovsky, I believe that was Yevgeny Romanovsky, but I could be wrong. The author and other leading pre-war Soviet players. Many games come with Rauzer's own annotations, together with analysis by, I won't try and pronounce that name again, but that's the author, Konstantinopolsky, Botvinnik, Levenfish, and others. The commentary has been updated by international master Grigory Bogdanovich using latest engines. Ultimately, Rauzer's story was a sad one. Was that the guy who maybe did the work on the Talbot? Because that Talbot was also a solid effort as well. Chess, and especially opening analysis, was an obsession for him, he once told Panov. Unfortunately, I just can't make myself work on theory of the game for more than 16 hours a day. My head can't endure more. That's what I mean. If you're doing 16 hours a day, that's nuts, right? So, like, for example, today I woke up about 7. Probably left the house about 9. After doing some useless stuff, probably should have left the house about 7. Then I went to the cafe, get that unhealthy food, writing a coffee. I went over to the gym. I probably left the gym just after 11. So I got back to the house about 11:30. What did I do after that? I did actually work on the chess book that I'm writing, but it wasn't much chess analysis. It was just more writing, really, in that part. Sometimes you do more chess analysis. That's the other problem as well, because you're having to make money. You're not doing as much analysis you like. You like to just focus on your own game. You're having to write books and stuff like that, and therefore that takes away from that. This obsession eventually drove him mentally ill, and he spent much of his final period in care. Rauzer lived largely in poverty and tragically died in his... That's the only thing I would say of my thought about the book, I would say, is that the period where he just basically just seems to brush it under the carpet, because I would have been fascinated to read about what happened to Rauzer. It might just be that there wasn't enough information about him at that time, so we didn't even know exactly what happened to him, why he had that breakdown. You know, that was fascinating to me. Maybe I'll delve into it into a different documentary. I could do a documentary series about chess players who've had mental breakdowns, right? That'd be fascinating, wouldn't it? Yeah, I've just had that idea. Right, please, nobody steal it from me. Yeah, and Konstantinopolsky, close friend and collaborator, is a very famous player. Over many years, I have heard of him before I've read this book, I must admit. Was a leading Soviet player and coach. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure I've heard of him, and he would have known all the top players in the Soviet Union around about that period. Even later, I would have trained a lot of people. Possibly, you know, he was probably friends with Furman, for example. There's a picture of him playing Furman in the book, Semyon Furman, who was famously Karpov's coach. So he probably coached a lot of these top Russian players when they were younger, Spassky, people like that. He trained David Bronstein. Obviously, I've met David Bronstein, very nice guy. Again, sadly, no longer with us. Was head coach of the Soviet women's team from 1954 to 1982. So that's a long time as well. And they had a very strong team as well. I was watching a game today between Divya Deshmukh and Zhu Gina, I think, from China. Divya won, nice game actually, in a Naidov, I think it possibly was. But as times have changed, now it's India and China are more dominating chess. It used to be Russia, because they had its prominence. I mentioned earlier on social media, the average age, Rauzer died at a young age, died in his 30s, I think, 31, 32. The average age of the top 10 in English chess is 48. That's the oldest I could find. I think I did a few countries. I think the next one was something like Netherlands or something like that, was possibly 40. And most countries were like in their 30s. Like 33 was like kind of like the average. So I think the reason we're falling behind as a chess nation in England is because of lack of money and a lack of support. And the reason why Russia did so well for such a long period was because they put a lot of money into chess, or or well, they didn't have that much money in the Soviet Union, but they put a lot of effort into chess, and they made it a very serious thing because of they could use that to promote their country, you know. And so that was why it was a massive deal when Bobby Fischer beat the Soviets, because in the Soviet Union that was really considered to be a very surprising result, because obviously Bobby Fischer they respected a lot. He was a maverick, he was a genius, he was a one-off. But you know, Soviet Union at that time when Bobby Fischer became world champion had dominated chess for many, many years, and after he pretty much retired in 1975, they continued to dominate it for many years after, with Anatoly Karpov, Garry Kasparov, and of course he was succeeded by Vladimir Kramnik. Anyway, so that's my book review of this book, A Chess Biography of Rauzer. And I think it's a very good book. I think it's worth having a look at that book. I like the book. It's got a lovely cover, and it's got a lot of very good chess analysis in the book. It probably lacks that wow factor to really blow you away, but if you haven't read about Soviet chess history, I must admit, because I've read a lot of these Elk and Ruby books now, I've read a lot about Soviet chess history. That's a bit different. But if you haven't read it much, then it's a fascinating book. It really is. So that's my review. Please leave your likes, comments, and please subscribe to the channel, because otherwise I won't get promoted on the algorithm and I won't get sent more chess books that I can read and potentially get better at chess. Thank you.